Hello, this is the Road to Past channel, and the topic of our video is the beginnings of life, the first microorganisms. Let's get started. The beginning of the journey, a dead planet preparing for life. Imagine this, more than 4 billion years ago. Earth is a very young planet. It has no greenery, no oceans, not even oxygen. The surface is hot, and the atmosphere consists of methane, ammonia, carbon dioxide, hydrogen, and water vapor. The sun shines less brightly, but a stream of asteroids, comets, and meteorites is hitting the planet. It's chaos, a real hell in space. And here, in the midst of all this, is chemistry. Simple, inorganic chemistry. But even then, it was laying the foundation for future life. Under the influence of lightning, ultraviolet light and geothermal heat, the elements begin to form new compounds, the first bricks of life. But how could something alive appear from the inanimate? This question has tormented scientists for centuries, and that's where the famous experiment comes in. The Miller-Urey experiment of 1953. A young graduate student, Stanley Miller, together with his supervisor Harold Urey, created a model of the conditions of the primordial Earth in the laboratory. They placed water, methane, ammonia, and hydrogen in a sealed flask, gases that could have been in the atmosphere of the young planet, and passed electric discharges through them. A kind of artificial lightning. The result? Within a few days, amino acids appeared in the vessel. The very substances that make up proteins in all living organisms. Theories of the origin of life. Who was first? In fact, there are many theories about the origin of life. One of the most famous is the hypothesis of the RNA world. What does it mean? In modern life, DNA stores information, proteins perform functions, and RNA transmits instructions. But RNA is unique. It can be both a carrier of information and a catalyst for chemical reactions. Imagine that the first primitive self-replication began with RNA molecules. A molecule that can make a copy of itself. That's almost life. But where did it come from? Scientists assumed that simple molecules, such as hydrogen cyanide or formaldehyde, were combined under the influence of energy into more complex structures, up to the nucleotides that make up RNA. These nucleotides could be joined into chains, and now we have primitive RNA, which begins to copy itself. Another theory is hydrothermal vents at the bottom of the ocean, where volcanic activity spewed hot minerals and gases into cold water. Entire chemical laboratories were created. In these black smokers, the temperature and conditions were ideal for the emergence of life. Microscopic protocells could have appeared there, which later became the basis of all living things. What do you think? What came first, RNA or deep-sea sources? Another hypothesis is panspermia. It states that life may have been introduced from outside. Comets, asteroids, microscopic bacteria from other parts of the universe could have infected the Earth with life. It's a bizarre idea, but it's quite scientific. From chemistry to biology, the birth of the first cells. Somewhere between 4 and 3.5 billion years ago, the Earth's oceans underwent a major transformation. Non-living molecules became living systems. It was a transition from chemistry to biology. The key stage was the formation of protocells, microscopic bubbles of lipids that formed primitive membranes. Imagine a drop of fat in a soup that traps various substances inside. These were the first steps towards a cell. Inside these bubbles, chemistry did not stop. RNA molecules, catalysts, and the beginnings of metabolism could be formed there. And over time, one of them began to multiply, transmit information, and change. This is already life. The first cells, or prokaryotes, were extremely simple. They had no nucleus, no complex structure, but they gave rise to all forms of life that we know. Imagine, one such cell could live, divide, pass on information to its descendants. And all this in a world without oxygen, without the ozone layer, under a powerful dose of radiation. How did they manage to survive? Probably they were anaerobic. They did not need oxygen. They lived on chemosynthesis, transforming minerals, or on simple reactions with sulfur and hydrogen. Some may have used the energy of light, and over time, photosynthesis appeared. Cyanobacteria, the first to change the world. Imagine this. The Earth is covered with oceans. The atmosphere is still without oxygen. And suddenly, cyanobacteria appear. These microorganisms were the first creatures to learn how to do what would later become the basis of all life on the planet: photosynthesis. Yes, they were the first to use the sun's energy to convert carbon dioxide and water into organic compounds. And, attention, to release oxygen. At first, this oxygen did not accumulate in the atmosphere. It oxidized metals in water, forming rusty deposits. But over time, the oceans could no longer absorb everything, and oxygen began to be released into the air. This was the beginning of the Great Oxygen Catastrophe. It was a catastrophe for the old world. Anaerobic microorganisms that could not live in oxygen died out en masse. But at the same time, it was a revolution. It opened up the possibility for new life forms that began to use oxygen for energy. And then, about 2 billion years ago, eukaryotes, complex cells with a nucleus, appeared. Their emergence is associated with another incredible event: endosymbiosis. When one cell absorbed another, and instead of digesting it, both began to live together. That's how mitochondria, the energy stations of cells, appeared. And later, chloroplasts that perform photosynthesis. That's the basis of all plants, animals, and eventually humans. All thanks to microscopic communities that learned to cooperate. The flowering of the microcosm, colonies, cooperation, nature's experiments. After eukaryotic cells emerged, life received a new impetus. These complex cells were bigger, more energetic, and much more efficient, and they began to unite. At first, into colonies, then into something bigger. Imagine how millions of individual cells create a single system in which each cell performs its own function. Some specialize in movement, some in food absorption, and some in reproduction. That's how multicellular organisms appeared for the first time. It was not a revolution, but an evolutionary test of the pen. Microscopic creatures were swimming in the seas, gradually moving away from solitary existence. They began to form the first primitive bodies, symmetries, tissues. It was not instantaneous. It took hundreds of millions of years of attempts, mistakes, and extinctions. But nature did not give up. And about 1 billion years before us, the first known archaeoplasts, the ancestors of plants, appeared in the waters of the ancient oceans. They already had chloroplasts, were able to photosynthesize, and opened a new era. An era of life that changed the planet from the inside. Traces of life. What did the first creatures leave us? The oldest traces of life we have today are not bones, skulls, or skeletons. They are stromatolites, layers of sedimentary rock created by cyanobacterial colonies billions of years ago. Yes, the first stone chronicles of life were created by microbes. Each layer of these formations is like a page in the history left by the ancient biosphere. They are found all over the world, in Australia, South Africa, and Greenland. Some of them are over 3.5 billion years old. It's incredible. We can touch the stones that were formed by creatures that lived when there were no trees, animals, or even oxygen in the atmosphere. But that's not all. Scientists continue to discover traces of ancient microorganisms in the most unexpected places. In the depths of Antarctica, in the geysers of Iceland, in the acid mines of Spain. And what's interesting is that many of these life forms are still alive. They have survived in extreme conditions, retained the genetic traits of their ancient ancestors, and open up another hypothesis. What if life on other planets can also exist beneath the surface, in hot springs or icy oceans? It was only the beginning. There is more to come. Evolution, great extinctions, the first animals, humans, and the mind. Subscribe so you don't miss a step of this fascinating journey through time. See you soon!